The valley called him a traitor. The four women called him something warmer. The rifle stock was cracked down the grip, an old split wrapped with rawhide that had dried brown over the years, and I was running a rag along the barrel when Margaret Holloway came through the gate, dragging a trunk she couldn't lift alone. I didn't move to help her right off. I watched. She was maybe 55, thick through the shoulders, wearing widow's black that had gone gray from the trail. She got the trunk to the step of the station porch, then stood breathing hard, one hand braced on her knee. She didn't look up. She had the kind of pride that doesn't want to be seen catching its breath. The kind that's been managing alone long enough that being seen struggling feels like a debt you didn't mean to take on. I set the rifle against the fence post and crossed the yard. She heard me coming and straightened before I got there. "I don't need," she started. "I know," I said, and took the other handle. We got it up the step and inside without another word. It was heavy. Books, maybe, or iron, something that mattered to her enough to haul across 300 miles of bad road. That was how it started, not with any plan, just a cracked rifle stock and a woman who wouldn't ask. My name is Cord Verla. The valley knows it, though they'd rather not. Half my blood is Apache, my mother's people, out of the Mogollon Rim country, and the other half is a rancher named Verla who died of a fever when I was 6 and left me nothing but his name and 20 acres of rocky ground that went back to the bank the following spring. I grew up in two worlds and belonged fully to neither, which is a particular kind of loneliness, the kind that doesn't announce itself. It just settles into the bones over years until you stop noticing it's there. The way you stop noticing the weight of a coat you've been wearing since before you can remember. I was raised mostly among my mother's people until I was 14, then came back to the valley to work, the way half-bloods did, useful for the things nobody else wanted to do, distrusted for everything else. I learned to read from a schoolteacher who charged me half what she charged the others, which she thought was kindness. I learned range work from men who'd use me all week and not speak to me directly if their wives came to the bunkhouse. I learned the high country routes from an old Apache man named Delgado who had traveled them his whole life and who told me. The winter I was 19, and we were camped in a snowstorm on the East Rim, that knowing a country is the only kind of ownership that can't be taken from you. 11 years ago, I stood in the commissioner's court and said publicly that the water rights belonging to the San Marcos Apache Band had not been legally ceded, that the surveyor's map was fraudulent, and that the valley ranchers who'd built on that land had built on a lie. I had the documents. I had a lawyer from Tucson who'd spent 3 weeks reading land grant records and came out looking like he hadn't slept any of them. The documents were real. The claim was solid. The ranchers had something else. They had the sheriff, the judge, and 40 years of being there first by their own accounting, and the deep valley conviction that what you've already built on is therefore yours by rights. The Apache got nothing. I got called a traitor to my neighbors and informed that I was no longer welcome at the Mercantile, the feed store, or the Methodist Social, which last one I hadn't been attending anyway, but I took the point. I didn't leave. That was the other thing they didn't forgive. A man who makes trouble is supposed to at least have the decency to disappear afterward. I stayed and built a small spread on the strip of rocky ground nobody wanted, along the North Fork where the soil was thin and the water ran grudging, and I ran 30 head and kept to myself and let the valley hate me at a distance, which is a manageable arrangement. I'd been doing that for 11 years when the stage line collapsed. 3 drivers quit in a single month, 2 to the railroad jobs opening up east, 1 to a fever he didn't walk away from, and the line couldn't replace them in time. The last run through Holloway Station had come in August, and now it was late September, and 4 women were stranded with no way south before the mountain passes closed for the season. Walt Ferris from the Mercantile came to my place on a Thursday afternoon. He didn't ride up to the door. He stopped his horse at the gate and called out, which was Walt's way of maintaining whatever he thought the moral distinction was between asking me for something and appearing to ask me for something. "The cut-off route," he said, "you know it." "Yes," I said. "The highway around shaves 4 days off the regular road." "I know what it shaves." He was quiet for a moment. "Nobody else knows it well enough," he said. "Not for a wagon, not with what's moving in that country right now." "What's moving in that country," I said, "is the Ray's brothers and at least 3 hired men running stolen horses south." "You know about them." That's why nobody wants to do it," I said. "I understand the problem, Walt. What is it you want me to say?" He looked at his hat, which he was holding against his saddle. "We've got 4 women at Holloway Station," he said. "They've been there a month. One of them has a baby coming. One of them's got a school waiting." He looked up. "I'm not asking you for the Valley, Verla. I'm asking for them." The distinction was genuine or it wasn't. I sat with it. "Give me a day," I said. He nodded and rode off. And I spent that day walking the North Fork and thinking about a route I'd ridden in my sleep for 20 years, and 4 women I hadn't met, and the Ray's brothers who I'd seen twice from distance and once up close, when I'd moved astray back across their unofficial line, and Pablo Reyes had smiled at me in the way he smiled at things he was thinking about hurting. Then I thought about Delgado on the East Rim in the snow, telling me that knowing a country was the only kind of ownership that can't be taken from you. And I thought that if there was ever a use for that knowledge, this was it. I rode to Holloway Station in the morning. I met them in the yard at dawn. Margaret Holloway I already knew, in the way of having moved her trunk. She owned a cattle operation down in Lordsburg, came up every year to buy breeding stock from Pepper Rains, and the stage collapse had caught her on the return trip. She looked me over the way you look over a horse you're uncertain about, checking legs, checking eyes, checking for something that might go wrong under pressure, and she said nothing, which I took as provisional acceptance. The young Mexican wife was named Rosalinda Ibarra. 19, maybe 20, married 8 months to a man waiting for her in Silver City. She had a baby coming 5 months along by the look of it, maybe 6, enough to show but not enough to slow her yet, and she'd been trying to get south for 6 weeks, each week adding to a worry she was carrying as quietly as she was carrying everything else. She was small and quick-looking, with dark eyes that didn't miss much. When I came into the yard, she was already seated in the wagon, her bag squared beside her, her hands folded in her lap. Ready. Had been ready for days, probably. The schoolteacher was Eleanor Marsh, 61 years old, which she told me unprompted as she was boarding, the way some people lead with their age to establish something. What exactly varies by person, but in Eleanor's case, I thought it was establishing that she'd been at this long enough to have opinions that weren't going to change without good evidence. She'd been up from New Mexico territory visiting a sister, and was trying to get back to her school before the fall session bled entirely away. She wore wire-rimmed glasses and carried a canvas bag that clinked when she moved, and she had a quality I recognized from certain Apache elders, the quality of having already decided what she thought about most things and being at peace with that. Not closed-minded, settled. There's a difference. The 4th woman took me a moment to place. She was standing at the edge of the yard with her back to the group, looking at the hills, and when she turned I saw she was maybe 30, fair-haired, wearing clothes that weren't quite right for the country, too clean, too Eastern, not in the way of a woman who'd been careful with them, but in the way of a woman who'd arrived with things she'd thought were practical, and was discovering they were something else out here. Her name was Dora Whitfield. She was a mail-order bride whose prospective husband had died of a stomach ailment 3 weeks before she arrived, and she had nowhere to go and no money to go there with, and she'd been at Holloway Station for a month trying to figure out what she did now. There was something careful behind her eyes that I read, correctly I think, as a woman who'd been surprised enough times that she'd stopped expecting things to go right. Not defeated, just not assuming. I looked at the 4 of them for a moment before I spoke. 4 days, I said. Maybe 5 if the creek at Rincon is running high. There's one water stop on the second day, out at the spring in the arroyo. Fill everything you've got before we leave this morning. After the spring, what you carry is what you have. Nobody spoke. There are men working the southern ridges that we don't want to meet, I said. I'll handle that. What I need from you is to do what I say when I say it without asking me to explain myself in the moment. There won't be time. Margaret Holloway said, "What does handle it mean?" It means I know this country and they don't, and I know the men and their habits, and if I say get down, you get down. She held my look for a moment. You know who I am. You're a woman who needs to get to Lordsburg. I'm also a woman who's been running a cattle operation for 16 years, she said, without a man telling her to get down. Good, I said. Then you'll understand exactly what I mean about trusting experience. She held the look a beat longer, taking in whatever she was taking in. Then she turned and climbed into the wagon and picked up the reins. That was Margaret, all of it right there in that exchange. She didn't fold and she didn't posture. She assessed, she tested, she got what she needed and she moved. I unhitched the station brake on the wagon, and we rolled out of Holloway in the thin early light, the hills still blue-gray ahead of us, the air carrying that particular September smell of grass gone to seed, and the first cold coming down from the high country. The first day was easy ground. Flat basin, good grass, the road packed firm from a dry August. I rode ahead on the roan and kept the wagon in sight without crowding it, checking the horizon east and west, getting a feel for what was out there, which on the first day was nothing that concerned me. The Rays' territory started around 15 miles south of our cutoff point, and they worked at night more than day, which gave me some margin. Rosalinda slept most of the morning, her head resting against her bag, the baby making its own demands on her energy. Eleanor Marsh read from a small book she held one-handed, steadying herself against the jounce with the other. Dora sat in the back with her knees drawn up, watching the country pass with the expression of someone who had not yet decided what she thought about it. Not hostile, not enchanted, just watching, taking account. Margaret drove. She was better than competent. She had light hands and she read the ground ahead, gave the team room to pick their footing on the rocky stretches, eased them down the short drops without any drama, kept a steady pace that wasn't punishing but wasn't lazy either. I'd half expected to spend the first day worrying about the wagon, and I didn't have to. At midday I found a hollow with good shade and grass, and we stopped to rest the horses and eat. I watered the team from the barrel lashed to the wagon's side. Rosalinda ate something wrapped in cloth she'd brought from the station. Eleanor produced dried apricots from her canvas bag and passed them around without ceremony, the way a person does a thing they've been doing for decades without needing to make anything of it. Dora Whitfield sat at the edge of the hollow, a little apart, and ate nothing, or if she ate something she did it quietly enough I didn't notice. She was looking at her hands, and there was something in her face I recognized. Not grief exactly, more the look of someone doing arithmetic that keeps coming out wrong, running the numbers again looking for the error, not yet willing to accept that maybe the numbers are what they are. I didn't go to her. There are times when leaving a person to their accounting is the only useful thing. The afternoon brought the beginning of the hard country, the basin tilting up into broken ground where the road narrowed, and the wagon wheels began picking up sparks off the shale. I moved back alongside and kept closer, watching the draws. The Rays' territory was still some miles south, but I didn't like the rock formations in this stretch, the way a man could get above you and have good sight lines down. Nothing showed. We made camp at dark in a rock-walled hollow I knew well, good sight lines east and west. The south approach squeezed through a gap I could hear footsteps in if they came quiet, which they couldn't do quiet enough. I built a small fire, small enough to cook on, large enough to be seen at distance. Let people know we were there, let them do the arithmetic on whether they wanted to come at a camp that expected them. Alina Marsh sat near the fire with her notebook on her knee, and she said, "You've camped here before." "A few times." "You know this route well." "Yes." She turned a page and wrote something. "The valley says you sided with the Apache against the ranchers in the water dispute," she said, without looking up. "The valley says a lot of things." "Is it true?" "I testified to what the documents showed," I said. "The documents showed the Apache had prior claim under the original land grant. That's what I said." "And the valley found that to be a betrayal." "Yes." "Of what exactly?" She looked up now, the wire-rimmed glasses catching the firelight. I thought about it. The honest answer and the easy answer were different answers, and Alina Marsh was not a woman you gave the easy answer to. You could feel that without even knowing her very long. Something in the way she sat, the way she waited, that communicated that she was actually listening and would notice if you slid past the real thing. "Of the idea that being here long enough makes it yours," I said. "The valley's been running on that idea for 40 years. I said it out loud and told them it had limits." "And they couldn't hear that." "They could hear it fine," I said. "They just couldn't accept it." Alina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's not an unreasonable principle to object to. The length of an error doesn't make it not an error." She said it the way she'd say anything else, plain and without performance. I looked at her across the fire. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me," she said, going back to her notebook. "I'm just saying what's obviously true." But it wasn't obvious to anyone in the valley. I sat with the fire and the dark hills, and the small warmth of a true thing said plainly by someone with no stake in saying it. The second day brought the hard country in earnest. The cut-off route left the regular road about mid-morning and started climbing into the rimrock, through a series of switchbacks that the wagon took slowly, the team leaning into the grade, the wheels finding purchase on the broken rock. I went ahead on foot for the sharpest turns, checking the surface, waving Margaret forward. She followed my hands exactly, which told me she'd driven rough country before and trusted a guide when the guide had demonstrated he knew what he was doing. That was a form of respect I recognized, not the kind you say out loud, the kind you show by doing. Around midday I noticed Rosalinda sitting too still, one hand pressed flat against her lower side, her eyes closed, the lines of her face pulled tight. I brought the roan alongside. "How long?" I said. She opened her eyes and looked at me. "Since last night," she said. "Pain or pressure?" "Both. More in the morning. It comes and goes." I looked at Margaret. She'd already read the situation and pulled the team to a stop without my asking. We got Rosalinda down from the wagon and into the shade of a large boulder, and Alina was moving before anyone gave her direction, canvas bag open on the ground, pulling out the vials and folded papers, kneeling beside Rosalinda with a focused economy of motion that told me she'd done this before, and not casually. "You're a doctor," I said. "School teacher," she said, not looking up. "With a useful education on the side. Move back, Verla, you're taking my light." I moved back. Dora Whitfield was already kneeling on Rosalinda's other side, holding her hand, saying something in a low voice. Whatever it was had a quality of steadiness to it, not comfort exactly, which can ring false, but steadiness. The voice of someone who's showing up and intending to stay. Rosalinda's face changed as she listened. The tight, managed look of someone bearing something alone opened slightly into something different, the look of someone who'd been found in the place they were trying not to be visible. I stood at the edge of the shade and waited. I am not a man who paces. Pacing is for people who think their anxiety is useful. Alina worked quietly. She checked Rosalinda's pulse at the wrist and at the neck. She pressed gently at her side and her back, asking questions in a low voice and listening to the answers with the unhurried attention of someone for whom this was not a crisis but a problem. There is a difference. A crisis is something happening to you. A problem is something you solve. After a while, she sat back on her heels. The baby is fine, she said. She's been carrying tension in her back since before we left, probably for weeks, and it's referring down into her side. She needs to lie flat for a few hours and rest properly, not sitting up in a wagon. We're halfway up the switchbacks, I said. I know where we are, Alina said, with the particular tone of a woman who has spent 61 years being told what limitations exist and who makes her own accounting. She needs to lie flat, so we'll make something she can lie flat on, and we'll use the rest of the afternoon, and tomorrow she'll be able to travel. Tomorrow is when we need to reach the water stop, I said. Then we'll reach it the following day, she said. Do you have something rigid under that wagon? Margaret had canvas strapped under the wagon bed. Fold-out side panels. She used to extend the bed for longer loads, which told me something about how she thought ahead. We rigged them into a pallet in the wagon bed, and Rosalinda lay down on it with her eyes closed, and Dora arranged her bag under Rosalinda's knees the way she'd been told would help, and that was how we spent the afternoon. Not moving, the horses resting in the shade of the rimrock, the women taking it in turns to sit with Rosalinda while the others ate and rested. I used the time the way I use any unexpected stop. I climbed the ridge above our hollow and spent an hour glassing the southern country with the small telescope I carried, working systematically east to west and back, looking for movement on the ridges. I saw nothing, which didn't mean nothing was there. The Ray's men knew this country well enough to move in the breaks, but it meant I wasn't being actively watched from the high ground, and that was something. When I came back down, Alina was sitting on a rock near the wagon, writing in her notebook, and she looked up when I appeared. Well, she said. Clear for now, I said. We'll keep the fire small tonight. She nodded and went back to her writing. I sat down nearby and cleaned the rifle again, which is something I do when I'm thinking. The motion is automatic. It frees up whatever part of the mind actually works on problems. After a while, Alina said, What do you call yourself? What? I asked the valley what they called you, she said. I know what they said. I'm asking what you call yourself. I thought about it. The honest answer had edges on it. A man who told the truth in the wrong room, I said. She wrote something. Does that bother you? She said. What, that it was the wrong room? That you did the right thing and got nothing for it? I considered. The fire was low. A scrub jay was making noise in the rock outcrop above us, the jerky, emphatic sound scrub jays make when they think something is in their territory. It used to, I said. It doesn't anymore, or not the way it did. What changed? Time, I said. And the recognition that I was going to have to live in the same body either way, the one that said it or the one that didn't. I'd rather live in the one that said it. Alina looked at me over the tops of her glasses for a long moment. That's the most useful philosophy I've heard in some years, she said. She wrote in her notebook, the scrub jay settled. Alina, I said. Yes. What's in the notebook exactly? Observations, she said. Natural history mostly, the occasional person who fits. She paused. Not many do fit, I mean. Most people are obvious. Their categories are visible immediately and nothing changes. She looked at the notebook. You're more interesting than that. I didn't know what to say to that. Get some rest, she said. I have the first watch. You don't need to. Verla, she said. I have been taking care of myself and 11 to 15 students at a time for 37 years. I can certainly manage a watch. I got some rest. The second night passed without incident. In the small hours when I took the watch from Alina, I sat with my back against a boulder and heard nothing from the south except the far sound of the rimrock cooling, the small creaks and settlings of stone that had been heating and cooling in this same rhythm since before there were people to notice it. Around 3 in the morning, Margaret came and stood nearby, not exactly keeping me company, just present. She looked south the way I had. "You see anything up there?" she said. "Dust 2 days ago on the southern ridge. Could be deer." "But you don't think it's deer?" "No." She was quiet. She had a Winchester she kept leaning against the wagon seat, well maintained, the kind of rifle a woman carries when she means to use it and not for show. "I can shoot," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm not telling you so you'll feel better about it," she said. "I'm telling you so you know what you have, the actual inventory." That was exactly right. It was exactly the right framing, not performance, not reassurance, just operational information. She was telling me the resources available so I could factor them correctly. "Thank you," I said. "What do you think they want?" she said. "What they want is whatever's in the wagon. They don't know it's 4 women and no freight. When they find out, they'll have to decide if it's worth the trouble." "And you think it won't be?" "I think they'll have to make the calculation under conditions I control," I said. "I'd like them to make it somewhere I pick." "You're planning an encounter." "I'm planning the terms of one if there is one," I said. She thought about that. "You've been doing this a long time," she said, "managing things in country where you're not wanted." "Yes." She nodded, like that confirmed something she'd been wondering about. Not with satisfaction exactly, more with the look of someone who's identified correctly what a thing costs and respects the price. She went back to her side of the camp, and I kept the watch, and the stars moved, and the rimrock kept its old cooling sounds. We reached the water stop by late morning on the 3rd day. Rosalinda improved and sitting up, the color back in her face. She'd been doing something with her hands during the slow wagon travel, braiding cord from a piece of rope she'd asked me for early on, and by the time we came down into the arroyo, I could see she'd worked it into a shape. I didn't know yet what it was. The spring was in the arroyo I dug out and lined with flat stones, probably 15 years ago. Clear water, cold, running steady. The kind of water you notice when you haven't had much for a day. We watered the horses first. Then we filled everything, canteens, the barrel, every vessel they'd brought. Rosalinda climbed down carefully and washed her face and neck, and some of the remaining tension in her body went with the water. I watched her and thought about what that journey had already cost her and what she was paying it for. A husband waiting, a baby coming, a life that existed somewhere south of here and needed her in it. While the others worked, I noticed Dora standing at the edge of the arroyo with her hands loose at her sides, looking at the water, not drinking, not filling anything, just standing with it. I finished with the horses and walked over. "The man you were coming to marry," I said. "Where was his claim exactly?" She looked at me. There was a small pause while she decided whether to answer, and then she answered. "Silver City area. He wrote about it in all 3 letters, said the vein was promising." "What kind of mining operation?" "Small, just him and a partner," he said. She paused. "I don't know if the partner was real. In his letters he said a lot of things, and I found afterward that some of them weren't exactly." She looked back at the water. "He seemed like a real man. I don't mean he was lying exactly. I just think he told the best version." "Most people do," I said. "I suppose." She turned a flat stone with her boot. "I did too, maybe. In the letter I sent, I told him the best version of myself." She looked up. "That's how we started. 2 people's best versions, trying to agree on something." I looked at the arroyo. The light in there was that particular canyon light, reflected off stone, golden and still. "Silver City is a real town," I said. "Not a claim, not a camp. It's had a newspaper for 12 years. There are women running businesses there, boarding houses, laundries, a dressmaker, I'm told. There's a hospital and 2 schools and a mercantile that's been in the same family for 20 years. I looked at her. "A woman who shows up and wants to work will find work." She looked at me for a long moment. "You're not just saying that." "I'm not the type," I said. The beginning of a smile moved across her face and then steadied. No, she said. I don't suppose you are. She looked back at the water. Why did you agree to do this? Walt Ferris said no one else would. Walt Ferris said it the wrong way, I said. No one else could, I can. That's a different thing. She thought about that. The arroyo was quiet except for the sound of the spring and the distant sound of the horses and the women's voices from up near the wagon. That's the thing about you, isn't it? She said. You don't need them to approve of it. You just need it to be right. I didn't answer. I've been thinking about that since we started, she said. How you move, how you don't explain yourself. You just do the thing and let it be what it is. She looked at me. I haven't been around a lot of people like that. Neither have I said. We stood a moment more with the water. Then she went back to fill her canteen, and I started to lead the horses up the bank. The Ray's men came in the afternoon of the third day, on a stretch of open track where the country fell away on both sides into long, shallow draws. Good ground for them. They'd picked it for exactly that reason. 3 riders out of the western draw, horses walking easy, positioned across the track without hurrying. The 2 brothers I knew by description. Esteban the older one, big across the chest, a man who'd learned young that size was useful and had never stopped relying on it. Pablo the younger, who smiled at things that weren't funny, third man I didn't know. I put my hand up and heard the wagon stop behind me. I rode forward until I was between them and the wagon. 30 yards, maybe a little less. Verla, Esteban said, the way you say the name of a problem you recognize. Rays. What have you got in the wagon? Women going to Lordsburg. Women with what? Clothes, books. One of them's got a baby coming, one has a school that needs her back. Pablo Reyes, who was smiling, said, what else? Nothing you'd want, I said. Esteban looked past me toward the wagon. I kept my eyes on his hands. His right hand was resting on his thigh, not on the gun, not yet. He was still in the arithmetic phase. We heard you're cozy with the Apache, he said. Word came down that you guided those San Marcos people to the good water last summer. I showed some people where a spring was, I said. It's a spring. It doesn't belong to anybody. Things belong to who uses them, he said. That's an interesting theory, I said. I've heard it before. This is our territory, Esteban said. We move through it when we want. I understand that, I said, and you'd like me to understand that we're in it. That's right. I do understand that, I said. I also understand that the only route through the rimrock that can take a wagon is the one I've been using since before you were working this range. And I understand that if something were to happen to this wagon, the only person who could say what happened and where is me. I kept my voice even. You know where I live. You know I know this country. If I don't come back to the North Fork, the people who know that will know where to start looking. Esteban thought about that. That's a bluff, Pablo said. Maybe, I said, but you'd have to know the country to know whether I'm bluffing, and you don't know it well enough. That's why you hired a third man. The third man's hand moved, and behind me I heard a rifle cock. Margaret, exactly on time, exactly placed. Esteban looked past me. His arithmetic was changing. She any good with it? He said. Better than good, I said. She runs a cattle operation in Lordsburg. She shoots because it's useful, not for show. I didn't know if the specific story was true. I knew Margaret, and I knew it was the kind of true that matters. The 3 horses held their ground. Pablo had stopped smiling. Then Esteban turned his horse, and the other 2 followed, and they went back into the draw and were gone. I stayed where I was until I couldn't hear the hoofbeats anymore. Then I rode back. Margaret had the Winchester across her knees. Did you mean what you said about me? She said. What would it cost you if I said no? I said. She thought about it with absolute seriousness. Not much, she said. I've been called things. What are we stopped for? Nothing, I said. Let's move. She put the rifle back and released the brake. We made good time in the last light of the third day and came into a camp I knew well, a wide shelf of rock with sight lines that couldn't be flanked from below. I built the fire bigger than I'd kept it, larger than I needed for cooking. Let anyone on the ridges see exactly where we were and do the full calculation on whether they wanted to come at a camp that clearly expected them. They wouldn't. The Reyes men were practical. Esteban was practical. It was Pablo I was less sure of, but Pablo wouldn't move without his brother. Rosalinda was sitting up and eating, color fully back, and she produced the thing she'd been braiding. She held it out to me across the fire. It was a horse, small as my palm, tight braided cord, the shape entirely right, the angle of the head, the set of the legs. Someone who'd made things with her hands her whole life. For luck, she said. I held it and looked at it. The firelight moved across it. Your husband is a lucky man, I said. He doesn't know it yet, she said, with a smile that was absolutely certain about this. Men usually don't. They find out later. I tucked the small horse into my coat pocket. Elena appeared beside me with 2 cups of coffee, produced from somewhere in her inexhaustible canvas bag. What else is in there? I said, taking a cup. Willow bark, catgut, quinine, the 2 novels I'm currently between, dried apricots. She sat down beside the fire with the ease of someone who'd been sitting beside fires for 6 decades. And the notebook. What's in the notebook tonight? You, she said. I looked at her. Not unkindly, she said. I've been watching you work for 3 days. The way you read the country, the way you spoke to those men this afternoon. The way you don't explain yourself to us, but you also don't dismiss us. She sipped her coffee. That's an unusual combination. Most people would say I'm just doing a job, I said. Most people who say that are doing less than a job, she said. You're doing what you're specifically suited to do in a situation that specifically needs it, with a particular care about the people in the wagon that I don't think you'd articulate even if I pushed you. She looked at the fire. I taught for 37 years in 6 territories. I know what that looks like when I see it, a person giving what they actually have. I was quiet for a moment. The fire was steady. The night was cold but not brutal. I asked you earlier what you called yourself, she said. Yes. You said a man who told the truth in the wrong room. She looked at me. I've been thinking about that all day. It's accurate, but it's incomplete. What's the complete version? A man who told the truth in the wrong room and then stayed anyway, she said, and then kept being exactly what he is, in a place that told him for 11 years that he wasn't supposed to be it. She held the look. That's the complete version. That's the thing I'll put in the notebook. I looked at the fire for a while. The cold came down from the rimrock slowly, the way cold always comes down from high places. Elena, I said. Yes. Thank you for the coffee. She smiled, small, certain, satisfied. You're welcome, she said. It's good coffee. Don't waste it on sentiment. The 4th day was the long descent. The cut-off route came out of the rimrock through the canyon I'd always called the chute, a narrow channel of red stone, maybe a 1/4 mile, where the wagon had to go careful and the light went dim and the walls breathed cold iron smell. I walked ahead with my hand on the lead horse's bridle, talking to the animal the way you talk to a horse in tight country, low and steady, and without urgency. Dora got down from the wagon when we entered the canyon and walked beside me. She didn't ask. She just got down and fell in step. We walked together through the chute in the near dark of the canyon walls, the sound of the wagon behind us, the horse's hooves ringing on the stone. What do you call this place? She said. I call it the chute, I said. The Apache who showed it to me had a name for it. It translates roughly as the place that decides. Decides what? Whether you're going to make it through. She considered that. Have you always made it? So far. She was quiet for a while. We walked at the horse's pace, which was slow and deliberate. Near the end of the canyon, she said, What you said yesterday, About Silver City. Yes. You meant it. I said I did. I know, she said. I believed you then. I still believe you. She was quiet a moment. I think what I'm actually saying is that no one has said anything that's straightforwardly useful to me in a long time. People say things to make you feel better or to get something or because they don't know what else to say. You just said the actual true thing because you thought I was capable of handling it. I didn't say anything. That's a different kind of kindness, she said, the kind that doesn't underestimate you. The canyon opened ahead of us into light, the plains visible beyond, blue and wide and enormous after the close stone. She stopped for a moment in the light. I stopped with her. Then she said, "Thank you, Cord." First time she'd used my given name. Any of them had. I'd forgotten what it sounded like without something else attached to it, without the history sitting on top of it, without the 11 years of the valley's accounting folded into the way they said it. Just the name, said plain, by someone meaning only the person. "You'll do fine in Silver City," I said. We walked on into the light. We came into Lordsburg in the late afternoon, the sun going copper over the western range, the town resolving from a brown smudge on the plain into streets and buildings and the ordinary noise of people. I got them to the stage depot. I helped with the bags. I saw to the horses. The depot man tried to place me, and then thought better of saying whatever he'd been about to say, which was its own kind of familiar. Rosalinda's husband was there. He'd come up from Silver City when the stage company sent word that there might be a wagon coming through, and he'd been at the depot since morning by the look of him. The hollow-eyed look of a man who has been afraid for longer than he shows, and is only now allowing himself to believe the fear is over. When Rosalinda came around the side of the wagon, he made a sound I won't describe because it was private, and she went to him, and he held her with both arms, careful of the baby, and she put her face against his shoulder, and that was all of it. Everything the 6 weeks had cost both of them, and the journey and the worry and all of it was in that moment, and then it was done. I looked away. Eleanor Marsh was already at the depot counter arranging her onward passage, talking to the clerk in the practical, unhurried tone she used for all practical matters. She stopped when I came near. She reached out and put her hand briefly on my forearm, dry and warm and certain, the way she did everything. "I'll be writing you into the natural history section," she said. "What section specifically?" I said. "Rare birds," she said, "the ones the field guides haven't caught up with yet." I laughed. I don't do that often. It surprised me enough that I heard it as almost foreign. "Safe travels, Eleanor," I said. "Safe travels, Cord." She turned back to the clerk. Where were we? Dora was at the edge of the platform with her bag, looking at the town the way I'd seen her look at the canyon opening, not with an ending in her eyes but a beginning. The weight forward instead of back. "Are you going to be all right?" I said. "I think so," she said, "and then I'll let you know in 6 months. I won't be anywhere you can reach me." "I know," she said, "but I'll think it in your direction." She looked at me. The careful eyes that had been taking account of everything since before we left were doing it now one last time, and whatever they found they seemed satisfied with. Then she reached up and touched my face, her fingers cool from the evening air, the touch quick, a thing said with the hand and then taken back, and she held my eyes while she did it, and she said, "You're a good man. I think you must know that somewhere." I didn't answer. "Maybe not," she said. "Maybe you just do what needs doing and you don't keep track of what it makes you. Maybe that's the same thing." She picked up her bag and walked into town. Margaret found me at the hitching post. The wagon was unhitched, the horses handed off to the depot's man, and she was standing with her Winchester in the crook of her arm, the way a woman carries a rifle when it's not a threat, just part of what she's carrying. "Verla," she said. "Holloway." She was looking at the street. There was a long quiet while she seemed to be deciding something. Then she turned to look at me directly, the way she'd looked at me that first morning, assessing, but the inventory was different now. 3.5 days of country and decisions and 1 confrontation and 4 nights of watch and the weight of a rope horse in my pocket. I asked Walt Ferris why you agreed to this, she said. He said you did it because no one else would. That's the wrong version, I said. I told him that, she said. I told him the right version is that you did it because you could, because you had the specific thing that was needed, the knowledge, the capability, the willingness. And the specific thing that was needed by 4 women who had no other option. She looked at me steadily. I've been running a cattle operation for 16 years. I know the difference between the last resort and the right person. I looked at the street. The valley called you a traitor, she said. I've been called things too. Running a spread without a husband, making my own accounts, turning away buyers I thought were cheating me. I know what it is to have the valley's opinion of you be something you live with rather than something you accept. She paused. I don't accept the valley's opinion of you either. It was said flat, without fanfare, the way she said everything that mattered. It's worth something, I said, coming from you. It's one person's opinion, she said. I know that, but for what it's worth, you're not what they said. You're actually the opposite of what they said. A traitor is someone who breaks faith with what's right for what's easy. You broke easy for what was right. She looked at me a moment longer. I won't forget this trip. I suspect you'll go back to being alone up there and that's your business, but I won't forget it. She reached out then, the same way a leaner had, brief and certain, and put her hand on my arm. The grip of a rancher, strong and direct, and she held it for just a moment. Then she picked up her trunk and walked into the depot. I stood at the edge of the platform for a while in the evening air. The street moved around me the way streets do, horses, voices, a dog trotting with purpose it seemed to have invented, lamplight starting to show in windows as the light fell. Lordsburg going about its business without any particular awareness that 4 women had crossed difficult country to get here, or what it had taken. I took the rope horse out of my coat pocket and held it in my palm. Small and tight braided, the shape of a thing in motion. Something made carefully by someone with a great deal to lose who made it anyway. I had a long ride back. The cut-off route would be different going north, harder on the first day, easier on the third, and the Ray's men were still somewhere in that country, but they were a known problem. Known problems can be managed. You see them for what they are and you plan accordingly. What I was sitting with was harder to see clearly. 4 women, 4 days, 4 encounters that had been nothing like what I'd expected, which says something about what I'd been expecting, which is probably that I'd been expecting nothing in particular, just to get them through and come back. One who'd given me operational inventory and trusted me with her rifle, and said I was not what the valley said, and meant it the way you mean things that cost you to say. One who'd stood in a canyon opening and said thank you with my name plain in it, stripped of everything that name usually drags behind it. One who'd put willow bark and catgut next to 2 novels in a bag because she'd decided years ago to be practically useful, and who'd written me into the rare birds section without ceremony. One who'd touched my face in the last light and told me I was a good man with the simple factual tone of someone reporting what the evidence shows. The valley had been looking at me for 11 years and seeing a traitor. 4 women had looked at me for 4 days and seen something else. I've thought about that distinction many times since. What makes one group of witnesses see clearly and another see what they decided to see before they looked? I don't have a final answer. I think it's something about stakes. The valley had a stake in their version of me, so they kept it. The 4 women had no stake in it. They just watched. And I think it's something about the country. Difficult country clarifies. Out in the rimrock, in the narrow canyon, in the long still nights with the fire small, there isn't room for anything but what's actually true. Who actually knows the road? Who actually has what's needed? The valley saw me in their courtrooms and their mercantiles and their judgments. The 4 women saw me in the chute, at the water stop, facing 3 riders across 30 yards of open ground. They saw what I actually am. I put the rope horse back in my pocket. The roan was at the hitching post, rested and fed, ready for the long road north. I untied him and swung up and settled into the saddle, which is as close as I come to feeling at home anywhere in the world. Lordsburg moved around me. Nobody paid me any particular attention, which was fine. I wasn't there for the town. I pointed the roan north toward the cutoff, toward the rimrock, toward the 30 head waiting at the North Fork, toward the small cold house and the cracked rifle stock and the North Fork running its grudging water through thin soil that nobody else wanted. It was the same ride back as it had been down. It wasn't the same ride. Same road, different weight, not heavy, not the weight of something added. More the weight of something set down, after you've been carrying it long enough that you'd stopped noticing it was a weight. The long accumulated weight of being seen a certain way, by people who decided to see you that way, for years and years until some part of you started to wonder if they had it right. 4 women had looked at me for 4 days and come to a different conclusion. I rode into the mountains. The first stars were showing over the eastern range, sharp and cold, the way stars are in country this high. The roan moved easy under me. Somewhere south of the rimrock, Rosalinda Ibarra was in her husband's arms. Somewhere on the Lordsburg platform, Eleanor Marsh was boarding her onward connection with her canvas bag. Somewhere in Silver City in 6 months, Dora Whitfield would be right or she would be wrong about being all right, but she'd said she'd think it in my direction, and I found that I would know somehow, whichever it was. And somewhere in Lordsburg, Margaret Holloway was back to running her operation. The mountains came up dark against the stars. I rode into them.